in Ohio, Betsy Markey in Colorado. I mean, there have just been some folks who really stood up, knowing that they might be putting their congressional careers at risk, that's been a pleasant surprise. So, all right, next. Let's see. I'm going to go boy, girl, so that I don't. Okay, go ahead. We've got a microphone for you.
Hi, my name is Francesca. I live in D.C., but I'm originally from Dallas, Texas.
Great to see you, Francesca.
Mr. President, you have pointed out that U.S. students have fallen from the top 20 nations in math and science and test scores, and jobs and contracts are going overseas. You've called education funding a national priority, but do you think it's time to label education funding a national security priority?
Well, I think it's a national security priority. Look, there has never been a nation on earth that lost its economic edge and maintained its military edge. I mean, the reason that we have the most effective military on earth in the history of the world is first and foremost because we have unbelievable men and women in uniform who make sacrifices on our behalf every single day and are extraordinary. But the second reason is because we've had the biggest economy in the world that can support this incredible armed forces that we have. And if we start falling behind economically, we will fall behind from a national security perspective. There's no doubt about it. And the single most important determinant of how we do economically is going to be the skills of our workforce. And you are exactly right. We used to be at the top of the heap when it came to math and science education. We're now 21st and 25th, respectively, in math, in science and math. We used to be number one in the proportion of college graduates in the world. We're now ranked around 9th. Other countries are making huge investments. I mean, China is doubling, tripling, quadrupling the number of college graduates it's generating. I mean, it is putting huge resources into it because it understands that unless they want to build low-wage, manufacturing plants for the duration of the 21st century, they've got to start moving up the value chain in the economy. They've got to start producing more engineers and scientists. India understands that. Germany has long understood that. And yet, here we are losing that first place position. That is unacceptable. So here's the thing. We know what works. There are schools out there that do great, even with kids who come from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, in the poorest neighborhoods, still producing outstanding results. And it requires having great teachers. It requires cutting through some of the bureaucracy to make sure that innovative learning is taking place. It means having accountability and the ability to measure the progress that students are making. And one of the things I'm very proud that we've done is institute this program called Race to the Top that basically says to states all across the country, you know what, you can compete for some special funding, some additional funding for your school district if you start instituting these reforms that we know work. And by the way, this is not a Democratic or Republican issue. Some of the things that we've been doing have not always been popular among some Democratic constituencies. But this is an example of doing what's hard because it's right. I'm not interested in us funding the perpetuation of the status quo. I want to fund what works. Math and science education, making sure that we are focused on building excellence in school districts all across the country that can produce more scientists, engineers. Absolutely critical. And we can do it. We know how to do it. But it does require some investment. It requires us making some good choices. So when my friends across the aisle propose a tax cut for not just the middle class, right? Because we're in favor of tax cuts for middle class families, but also then want to give tax cuts that would only go to the top 2% of Americans, income-wise, which, by the way, includes me, so I'd get a tax break, despite living in this really nice house right down the street. When they make that argument, I say to them, you know what? I would love to keep taxes low for everybody. And by the way, taxes are a lot lower under an Obama presidency than they were under Ronald Reagan's presidency. But I'm not willing to borrow $700 billion that we don't have that will then require me to cut investments that could produce more math and science teachers or more scientists and engineers. That doesn't make sense. All right? And that's an example. That's an example of the kind of choice that exists on November 2nd. And you know, when you're talking to your friends and neighbors and asking them to commit to vote, that's what you got to be talking about. Is our long-term future depends on us making good choices now, because this is a more competitive environment than it's ever been. And we're digging ourselves out of a big hole, and we've got this big deficit that we inherited, and because of the emergency measures that we've taken, that has added more pressure on our budget. And all this means that we've got to make smart choices. We can't just do everything we want. We've got to do the things that are necessary to make sure that America can compete. That's got to be our top priority.
Mr. President, I'm sad to say this. We have time for one more question.
One more question. All right. So it's a guy's turn. This gentleman in the purple shirt.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Matt Verghese from the great state of Maryland, very close. A lot of times when I talk to my friends who are looking for jobs for the first time, they're very, very anxious about the future. They're very anxious about finding jobs, about settling down, about owning their first home. And their parents are also worried about my generation as well. Right. What can you tell them to reassure them to make sure they aren't overcome by fear and can remain hopeful in the future?
Well, one of the great strengths of America is our adaptability. Now, this is not the first time we've gone through difficult times, obviously. This country was founded on defying the odds. Right? Nobody thought that you could start this country of and by and for the people, and that everybody would be treated equally, and that over time, not only would women win the right to vote and slaves be emancipated and become full citizens, but we'd be attracting people from all corners of the earth, and somehow the whole thing would work. I mean, that defies imagination that we were able to pull this off. But that core idea, embodied in the Declaration of Independence, in our Constitution, contains such a profound truth about the worthiness of every individual and our ability to come together around a set of principles and laws that we have been able to overcome slavery, depressions, world wars. There have been moments where it looked like we were going to be overtaken, and yet somehow we adapted and renewed ourselves and got back on track. That's true even in recent history. I mean, a lot of the young people here won't remember this, but back in the 1980s, it wasn't China that everybody was worried about. It was Japan. And people were having almost the exact same conversation now, or back in the 1980s, that they're having now. Right? Japan was cleaning our clock. They're taking over. They're buying Rockefeller Center. And there's no way we can compete. And yet, American businesses got leaner and they got more efficient, and people started working harder, and we were more innovative, and we improved quality control, and we made a series of decisions that over time got us in a very strong position. So we tend to meet these challenges, but every once in a while, having gone through sort of the wrenching economic turmoil that we've gone through, we have to adjust to new realities. And we have to be honest and critical about where we're falling short. And so right now, we have to be honest that our education system has slipped. We've got to be honest about the fact that competition is rising around the world, and that means our businesses have to be more competitive. We've got to focus more on exports. I think families, as well as the federal government, have understood that you can't just operate on the basis of debt and consumption. There's got to be savings and production. I think we now recognize painfully that an economy that's just built on a financial sector that is thinking about gaming the system all the time instead of actually just financing businesses that are actually producing goods and services for people is not the best way to organize our economy, and it means that we've got to have more effective regulations. I think we recognize that if our healthcare system keeps on gobbling a bigger and bigger percentage of our economy, that we're not going to be competitive with other countries. So there are a whole bunch of decisions that we're having to make right now, but we'll make them. We will make them because we've made them in the past. Sometimes it's painful because this is a big, diverse democracy. There are a lot of arguments. People yell at each other and are very passionate about different ideas about how we solve those problems. But eventually, I think the instincts of the American people are good. The instincts of the American people are sound. I think they know that nobody's promising us that this, this experiment of ours in democracy is going to be easy. But what we know is if we work hard, if we're unified, if we're respectful of one another, if we stay focused on not just the short term but on the next generation, that we can solve our problems. And so I think letting your friends know that America has gone through tougher problems than this, and we've solved them, and we're going to solve these problems in our generation. Communicating that confidence about the future is going to be really important. And what makes me confident is all of you. Because I get one of the great things about being president is I get to meet the American people from every state, every walk of life, every station. And you guys give me confidence. You guys give me hope. But I really need you to get out on November 2nd. Because then if all of you vote, I promise we're going to do just great. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.